Bonjour Lierre, merci d'avoir accepté cette entrevue. Nous allons clarifier les idées que vous développez dans le mythe végétarien. Essayons au travers de cet échange, de cet entretien, d'éclaircir un petit peu votre livre et d'expliquer ce constat.
So most people become vegetarian or vegan because they meet somebody else. And in my case, I was 16 years old and I met another teenage girl whose family was vegan. You know, she showed me pictures of factory farming and also explained how bad dairy and meat was for my health long term. And I think, like most idealistic young people, I felt very strongly that there were many bad, unjust, and destructive things happening. If you simply eat these foods and not these foods, you can save animals, protect the earth, do good things for your health, and make more justice for humans. So I took it up with a fervor. I destroyed my health completely, which is what happens to everyone who does this long term. But it also set me on a different path of trying to understand what really is destroying the planet.
Alors justement par rapport au titre, pourquoi le mythe végétarien?
So the myth is that if we eat a plant-based diet, we can save animals and the earth and humanity. Now everything they say about factory farming is true. And I think we can all agree that factory farming is something that needs to stop. But the problem is way bigger than just factory farming. So we have to understand what agriculture is. And you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it. And I mean down to the bacteria. And then you plant it for humans. So this is mass extinction because all of those animals and plants are literally wiped from the face of the earth. 200 species go extinct every day, 98% of the world's forests and 99% of the world's grasslands have been effectively destroyed, and that's for agriculture.
Tout d'abord, vous définissez 3 chapitres dans votre livre, les moraux, les politiques, les nutritionnistes. Alors, pourquoi ces catégories? Vous allez nous les définir et quelles sont les différences? Et surtout, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est quelle psychologie y sont associées.
So the ethical vegetarians believe that life is possible without death, even without harm to any sentient being. And I think these people feel very deeply the suffering of other creatures. That was probably my main motivation for becoming a vegan. I did not understand at age 16 that life was not possible without death. But also growing up in a very urban environment, which most of us do, I had no idea what was involved in growing food. The next vegetarians are the political vegetarians. Those people are motivated by the idea that it would be a more just distribution of resources if we all ate plants instead of animals. So there's 2 problems with this. The first is that people aren't hungry because of a lack of food. They're hungry from a lack of justice. And the other problem is that this idea that we can feed hungry people in poor countries by selling them food from rich countries that's colonialism. People know how to feed themselves, it's just that the rich are stealing from them. So the political approach that we should be vegetarians to feed them is really just a colonial approach. And then the third vegetarians are motivated by health. So they believe this paradigm that fat and protein are going to kill them and they should only eat carbohydrates. And there are simply way too many nutrients missing in that plant-based diet for it to be viable long term. And there's a whole generation of us who tried this long term and we all ended up damaged.
Alors moi je voudrais réagir par rapport aux célébrités véganes. Donc il y a Matt Monarch que vous connaissez. Que pensez-vous de ces tendances au détox, des jus, des mouvements d'une morale dogmatique et radicale par l'alimentation végane que l'on voit augmenter de plus en plus sur YouTube par exemple? Sont-ils dans un déni comme vous l'aviez été pendant 20 ans? Expliquez-nous.
Most of them don't last long. They'll do it for a year or two. And then the vegans hate them when they have to go public and say, I ate a burger, it wasn't working. And I mean, we've seen that over and over again in the pop culture and the media. And you might feel better for a month or two. A lot of people, when they take up this diet, they stop eating junk food. And right there, you're going to feel better.
Alors parlons d'une autre personne, d'un athlète qui s'appelle Rheumatoid. Pourquoi, selon vous, il prône ce mode d'alimentation, puisqu'il est sportif, ça résonne par rapport à notre question précédente. Certains se sentent bien avec un régime végétarien, comme vous disiez, et en fin de compte, petit à petit, leur corps se dégrade et il y a simplement un changement d'alimentation qui est pris en conscience.
So for an athlete like him, his body was not built on a vegan diet. I mean, his mother fed him eggs and milk and butter and meat when he was growing up. I've seen the children of vegans, and they do not look like him. So given that he already has a body built on meat and milk, sure, for a few years you can do this to yourself, especially when you're young. I mean, and I don't know particularly what he eats, but a lot of the athletes who claim to be vegan are eating highly manufactured industrial protein powders, which don't exist in nature. And that's the only way they can build that kind of muscle mass without eating animal products. So this really isn't a plan for food for the rest of us. Most of them are going to give up too. They're just going to get too exhausted, and there's just too many deficiencies in the diet.
Moi, je voudrais rebondir par rapport aux enfants. Est-ce que du coup, vous pouvez dire à nos auditeurs que justement c'est dangereux pour un enfant?
So there's not enough fat in the diet. Our brains are 60% fat, and 25% of that is cholesterol. And you only get one chance to build a brain when you're a baby. But the problem is that the health status of the mother determines how healthy the breast milk is. And there are quite literally vegan babies that have died because their vegan mothers could not provide nutrition for them. So vitamin A, vitamin D, B12 cannot be found anywhere but in animal products. And then there's just not enough calories. You know, and if the breast milk doesn't have enough fat, there's not enough calories for a growing baby. So babies have died and they've been permanently damaged from their parents believing in this diet.
Je pense qu'il y a des auditeurs qui ne sont pas très ravis d'entendre ça, mais en même temps, le but, c'est d'informer ici. Dans Prévention Santé, on informe.
I try to emphasize that the values that underlie veganism are not the problem. So justice, compassion, sustainability, those are the only values that are going to get us to the world that we all want. So I try to tell people that they don't have to stop being the person they want to be. They just need more information to make better decisions.
Est-ce que selon vous, il existe un risque immunitaire justement à consommer une alimentation végétarienne et surtout vis-à-vis d'un risque de cancer par rapport au pH sanguin?
So we have a concept called the diseases of civilization. And this is because it's been noted for hundreds of years that people in rural areas had better health than people in urban areas, especially when physicians from European countries traveled to other places in the world where there were still hunter-gatherers. They were amazed at the health status of people who were eating a very traditional prehistoric diet. It's noted over and over again in the literature that there is no cancer amongst these people. They have no diabetes, no heart disease, no autoimmune diseases, and often no mental illnesses, so no insanity. They follow the spread of agriculture around the world. Particularly obvious, of course, is rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. But it leaves very dramatic evidence in the skeletons that remain. So as wheat agriculture spreads across Europe, right behind it in the archaeological record are skeletons with rheumatoid arthritis, which is never seen before that. And the first thing that happens when people take up agriculture is they shrink 6 inches and their teeth fall out. It's been a disaster for human health as well as the planet.
Pourtant, beaucoup de véganes diront qu'ils sont en bonne santé et que sur 3, 5, 10 ans, ils sont toujours en bonne santé. Est-ce que selon vous, c'est un mythe par rapport à votre livre?
You can string this along for quite a while. I mean, I did it for 20 years, but the longer you do it, the worse the damage will be. You know, you're drawing down your body's reserves of things like vitamin D, vitamin A, fat, protein. If you give your body enough calories, it will limp along because life wants to live. But the average person who tries a vegan diet only lasts 3 months. I mean, I think the body has its own wisdom, and you know you're hungry, there's something wrong. And even people who identify as vegans long term, when they're asked in private, the number one thing that they cheat on is they eat a burger once a week. That's what the studies show. So a lot of the people who really are sort of in charge of the vegan movement, the big spokespeople, after they come out of it, and they all do eventually, they all have these stories.
On en parlera plus en détail après, mais en fait, c'est une sorte de mode, on peut dire ça un peu comme ça.
Yeah, I think it's motivated by very good-heartedness that people want it to be a better world, and this seems like a solution until you have more information.
Alors moi, je voudrais parler de notre différence entre l'homme et le gorille. Vous en parlez, page 159 dans votre livre. Alors en quoi notre métabolisme n'a rien à voir avec justement les gorilles et les ruminants? Et justement dans votre livre aussi, vous dites que le mammifère auquel on ressemble le plus proche est le loup.
Sure. So if you think about a gorilla, you picture one in your mind, there you have a great big barrel-y torso. We have a much slimmer rib cage. Our profile is much thinner. That's because they have a huge digestive tract in there. So they can digest cellulose and we cannot. And when animals can digest cellulose, it's not actually the animal that digests it. The animal is actually making a home for bacteria And it's the bacteria that digest the cellulose. It's the same for a cow. They have 4 chambers in their stomachs. And you'll notice they have that same barrel shape. It takes a lot of space to carry around those fermentative vats that actually digest the cellulose. Now, the interesting thing is the animals themselves are not actually eating the cellulose. They're actually feeding the bacteria the cellulose. So a gorilla will take it from leaves, and a cow will take grass. And then that cellulose is actually digested by bacteria. The animal herself is eating the bacteria, and that bacteria is very high in fat and protein. So in the end, all animals eat fat and protein. It's just how we get it. And humans need to get it directly because we don't have that kind of digestive system. A gorilla or a cow will have the bacteria ferment for them, and then they eat the products, the bacteria themselves. So indeed, we have a digestive system that's like wolves. It's very short, the digestive tract is short, and it's essentially based on acid. Bacteria can't survive in that acid environment. So we have that first stomach, our only stomach, and that stomach produces acid that breaks down the food that we eat. But that food has to be fat and protein because we can't manufacture it through bacteria. And that is the digestive strategy of all carnivores.
Aujourd'hui, en France, se développe de plus en plus un régime dit paléolithique. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez par rapport à votre expérience? Et selon vous, est-ce que c'est une solution la plus adaptée pour notre mode de vie actuel?
Yes, we have Paleolithic bodies. For 2.5 million years, we ate the large ruminants that the African savanna provided. We have very big brains and very short digestive tracts. And the only way that's possible is if we eat very nutrient-dense food. If you think of a football field, and that represents the entire length of our time on Earth, the very last half a yard is the time that we've been doing agriculture. All the rest of that time, we were essentially eating large ruminants. So our bodies are not adapted to an agricultural diet.
Est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire quelques mots sur Denise Minger?
Denise Minger is a fascinating woman. She was a vegetarian and a vegan. I think when she was 9 years old, she started. And of course, her health declined rapidly. And like most of us who have been through this, it's a very painful process to have to admit that it's not working anymore. So she spent a year or two researching on her own why this doesn't work. And she is self-educated and very smart. And, she realized pretty quickly that there are serious deficiencies in the diet she was eating. So 3 years ago, she decided to reread the China Study, which is a famous book by T. Colin Campbell, in which he tried to prove that eating animal products was the worst thing for human beings. Well, Denise spent months with his book, his research, and figured out step by step everything that was wrong with it. But she went into his data tables and actually refigured all the numbers. She found that even T. Colin Campbell didn't find what T. Colin Campbell says he found. His conclusions don't match his own research. So this created an explosion in the vegan world. And she came in for a lot of criticism, especially because she's young and she's a woman. And people said things like, "You're so pretty, why would you do math?" So she's written a book called Death by Food Pyramid. And she's also working on a book specifically about the China Study. And I cannot recommend her book and her website highly enough, especially if you're a recovering vegan.
Est-ce que le fait, comme vous le disiez, que ce soit une femme et active, joue un rôle dans cette transmission?
I don't know why some of us get it worse than others. I think I got a lot because I was the first really public one. But there were conspiracy theories that she was actually me. There can't possibly be 2 people who have the same story. But I know she does get death threats. Really, anybody who's publicly come out against veganism, who's been a vegan, will get this. It's partly there is a religious aspect to this worldview. I think that those of us who come in for the most criticism refuse to cede the moral territory. If I was to say animals don't matter, the earth doesn't matter, just do whatever you want, have fun with food, they wouldn't care because they could write me off. But I still claim the same ethical framework, and they find that unbearable. The fact that they're willing to assault people and send death threats, there's something wrong.
Dans votre livre, page 168, on parle des risques des céréales sur les maladies auto-immunes. On va parler aussi du mythe de l'apport glucidique. Page 234, on va parler de Gary Taubes.
So Gary Taubes is he's a journalist, but he's a science writer. So he has a lot of training in a background in science. And he wrote a book that's become quite famous. It's called Good Calories, Bad Calories. So he spent 5 years researching this book that what has gone wrong in the human diet is an overload of carbohydrate and not enough fat. The problem with a plant-based diet is partly a problem of excess. So there's an excess of carbohydrate. And carbohydrates, they're just sugars. And you might call it, whole grain when you eat it, but in your guts, it's broken down into simple sugars. So all of the diseases of civilization are ultimately caused by too many sugars. Right. So I'm assuming you ate a lot of cheese, a lot of cream, sausage, bacon. And these are foods that will keep you healthy generation after generation.
Le soja est une question très dure à expliquer. Alors justement, c'est lors de la lecture de votre chapitre avec Kelati Daniel, donc soja, ami ou ennemi. Donc je vous remercie de ce chapitre qui m'a fait ouvrir les yeux et prendre conscience de vraiment ce qu'est le soja.
There are a number of problems with soy and they cannot be overcome. These are substances that look very much like the estrogen that animal bodies create. So your body is fooled and tries to use them. They will lock onto your estrogen receptors and block actual estrogen, and your body will try to use it, but it's not the appropriate chemical form of it. And what's been noticed in children who are given soy milk is very frightening precocious puberty. There are, in the scientific literature, there are infant girls who start menstruating. And there are, young girls with advanced breast tissue. In the United States, the girls most likely to drink soy formula are African American girls, and the precocious puberty is epidemic amongst these girls.
Selon vous, le soja, pourquoi il y a beaucoup de végétariens qui prennent le soja? Et puis aussi cette solution de l'alternative au lait de vache.
I think this is why there's so much resistance to examining soy as a very problematic industrial food. If it was any other substance, I think people who are on the left would name this problem for what it is, but they can't because they're attached to the idea of soy.
Les Chinois, les Japonais consomment du soja tous les jours. Est-ce qu'il y a vraiment un réel besoin par rapport au territoire?
So yes, when people are starving, they'll eat anything. Traditionally, soy was never used as a protein substitute. The only people who ever ate soy as a staple were monks in some Buddhist orders, and that was because they knew that it suppressed their sex drive. In Japan, they eat 2 tablespoons of soy a day. It's used as a condiment. And understand that when they eat it with fish soup, with fish broth. One of the problems with soy is that it blocks the absorption of minerals. So if you're eating it with fish broth, you're getting a whole bunch of minerals to make up for that. Fish and seafood are also very supportive of thyroid function because of the iodine. And soy is a known goitrogen. It is destructive to the thyroid gland. That was first noted in the 1930s when they tried feeding soy, bulk soy to animals. And immediately they all got thyroid problems. But if you eat a little bit of soy with fish broth, that is hopefully going to offset the dangers. Soy is also fermented traditionally in Japan. Soy naturally has a lot of what are called anti-nutrients. These are substances that plants produce to stop themselves from being eaten. They're poisons, they're toxins. And by fermenting, you can disable some of those anti-nutrients. And so traditional soy sauce will be fermented for a year or two.
Lierre, est-ce que vous accepteriez d'écrire un ouvrage pour un ex-vegan qui devrait suivre?
It's a very hard process emotionally. The thing about being a vegan is not just what you eat, it becomes who you are. So it's like your whole identity collapses and your whole place in the world doesn't make sense anymore. So I think it's helpful to hear that other people have been through this and there is something good on the other side.
On va parler justement de notre environnement. Est-ce qu'il y a un monde possible sans monoculture?
Well, it's really the only choice we have. We have to repair what we've destroyed. So I say we repair, we restore, and we rejoin. And we have to restore the creatures that have been removed to the extent that we can. We have to let them back in. And if we just got out of the way, that repair would happen. We have to learn to live once again as members of those biotic communities. Agriculture means imposing ourselves across the living world. And so we have to stop doing that and be members of those communities again. So I honestly think we'd be happier if we were living that way. Also, we'd have a planet. And right now, we're not going to have a planet at the rate we're going.
Alors vous parliez de l'agriculture actuelle et justement par rapport à la monoculture, nous on a une image en France qui s'appelle Pierre Rabhi. Si je reprends des extraits de votre livre, page 113, vous parlez de sol inadapté aux cultures de céréales. Aussi, l'agriculture est plus ressemblante à une guerre qu'autre chose. Sommes-nous en train de détruire notre bonne alimentation par sa surconsommation et cet élevage industriel?
Yeah, the world was basically out of topsoil by 1950. So the first problem is that it's mass extinction because you're clearing all the life off the land. But another problem that comes with that is that you're destroying the soil every time you do this. The land has to be cleared if you're going to plant corn or wheat or soy. But exposing the soil kills it. It needs permanent cover, and it needs the deep roots that only perennial plants have. Those deep roots provide channels for rain to actually enter the soil. And then in times when there's no rain, those roots can then draw the water up and provide water for the community of life. It's also only the roots of those perennial plants that can reach down to the rock below and bring up minerals to the rest of the community of life. And we're destroying all of that when we do agriculture. And this is why some people say that agriculture is mining the soil, because it removes the minerals and there's no way to replace them. 1 tablespoon of soil can have over 1 billion living organisms. 1 billion. Huge. And those creatures are the ones that actually do the basic work of life. There's this famous saying that we owe our entire existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. And what's in that soil, of course, is all those organisms that do the basic recycling of nutrients that we all rely on.
Vous parlez dans votre livre de sauver le monde, hein, page 281. Pour sauver le monde, nous devons d'abord cesser de les détruire. C'est votre constat?
The number one most destructive activity that humans have done to the planet is agriculture. That is literally how we have destroyed the world. Because you take over an entire ecosystem and you wipe the life right off of it.
Selon vous, quelle est la meilleure approche nutritionnelle dans notre pays en 2015? Est-ce que vous avez des noms, des ouvrages, des documents qui traitent sur la question pour informer les auditeurs?
Oh, so many good recommendations. Gary Taubes' book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. Anything by Drs. Michael and Mary Dan Eads. They have Protein Power was their first book, and they've had a number of subsequent books. I would recommend Sally Fallon's book. It's called Nourishing Traditions. I would recommend Native Nutrition by Dr. Ron Schmidt. All of these books essentially argue the same thing, that we are no longer meeting the needs of the human template by eating agricultural and specifically industrialized foods.
Quand on parle de végétarisme, on parle souvent de carence. Comment avoir un corps sans carence?
So humans, our bodies are designed to eat very nutrient-dense foods. Our brains are really big and our digestive tracts are really small, and that happened at the same time in evolution. Our brains got bigger and bigger as our digestive tracts got smaller and smaller, and our brains, in fact, use 25% of our energy. That's how much energy they require. And the only way you can have, such high energy needs with such small digestion, it means you have to eat nutrient-dense foods. So if you use that as your basic kind of goalpost, we should be eating a lot of meat, and we should be eating good quality dairy products if we can tolerate them, eggs, all the animal products. That's where most of the nutrition is in meat and in milk and eggs. And that is food that we really depend on to have that perfect health generation after generation.
Sans vouloir trop effrayer les auditeurs, parce qu'on va parler de certaines choses qui peuvent les choquer, quelles sont les conséquences les plus préoccupantes des personnes qui ont suivi un régime végétarien?
One of the biggest problems is depression and anxiety. There was a German study that showed that vegetarians were 2 to 3 times as likely to have mental illness. So depression, alcoholism, addiction, anxiety, eating disorders are very, very high amongst vegetarians. Suicide and even violent death, murder, 2 to 3 times as high. There was another study that was done at the University of Oxford that measured the size of people's brains over a 5-year period, and the people who ate meat had the biggest brains. The people who ate vegetarian or vegan especially had the smallest brains, and in fact, the largest brain of the vegan was smaller than the smallest brain of the meat eater, and they lost 5% of their brains. So 1/20 of their brains was simply gone.
Pour conclure, Lierre, si vous étiez à ma place en tant que journaliste, qu'est-ce que vous poseriez comme question à Lierre?
What's the most important thing we can do to save the planet? Is what I would ask.
J'aimerais reprendre une phrase de votre livre pour terminer, quand vous dites « Mais pour sauver le monde, nous devons aussi en fin de compte le sauver, abandonnez tout sauf votre courage et rejoignez la bataille ».